So, a lot to pick up on. Thank you, Michael, for all of that rich content. I'm going to start by looking a little bit at, we all know that this opacity of the sector has been an issue for some years now. There are multiple calls for philanthropic capital to be more transparent, for us to be more open about what we deliver on. If there are programs that work, let's say that. If there are programs that don't work, why are we shy of that? And I think it's really important that we start to have a much more open conversation, a transparent conversation about why we are not more forthcoming. I'd like to start with you, Mona. You had some ideas when we had a discussion last week with Mr. Gates himself, who was here in the UAE to talk more broadly about philanthropy. And you had some very specific points about the importance of the narrative. Share with us how you think that can help drive impact.
Well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion last week with Bill Gates, and one of the topics of discussion was content development. And I really emphasized on that because I feel that the region speaks a lot about how we needn't speak about our philanthropy because we don't want to brag about it, and that's our culture. But I think content development can be done in an innovative way, and that's what we all agreed upon, whether it be an article that you write about, or a blog post, or a video content. I think we can really elaborate on the philanthropy that's done in the region through good content development, particularly in this digital age that we work in. And I think it's important for the region to embrace this content development, and it can be done, particularly with the new generation also working in this nonprofit sector. So we needn't shy away from the fact that we're doing really great work, and I think we need to speak about it a little bit more. And there are innovative ways of speaking about the cause rather than about us. It's not about bragging. It's really about speaking about the cause and influencing others to do more. And
as you said before, engaging younger generations who we know are have intrinsically a greater sense of social purpose if you believe some of the research. And Michael has highlighted, of course, the importance of, or the sad thing that sometimes we have solutions, but we don't scale them up. And there's big conversations about scaling. I want to come to Natasha. I mean, you've been very involved in sort of transformative philanthropy in the region, coming out of Saudi Arabia, talking about catalytic philanthropic capital, venture philanthropy, new models. How are you finding it in terms of convincing philanthropists, even your own organization, to share what doesn't work so that we can learn from it, and so we can be data-based, so we can be evidence-based?
A great question, and I just want to
Sure.
say something about what Mona said. I think we need stories. We need real-life stories. That's what it comes down to, really. It's focusing on people's lives and their own personal stories rather than...
We have stories.
Okay, good. I think we all have stories. We're just not sharing them
Absolutely,
as stories.
yeah.
So anyway, I agree with you 100%. Yeah. But in terms of how we're doing and how we're talking about failures as well as successes, I think it starts with leadership. If leaders in an organization are willing to come out to events like this and publicly in other places as well, speak about their failures and what they've learned, I think that's a great message that comes through to the rest of the organization and also in the sector. I mean, we've tried to do that whenever we can, and often we will look at it's strange. Why would the leaders of King Khalid Foundation talk about failures? And we would always say that it's not about blame. It's about learning. What have we learned from this failure? So let's not focus who did it and why. That's obviously something we can look into. But the whole point is what have we learned and how can we use this data to then help us design our future interventions and what we do. I think there's also, when we look into sharing failures, it's important to look at it from two standpoints: from internal, organizational, what worked, processes, activities, capacity of staff, the amount of money, how much have we researched the issue, and then also external, what worked and what didn't work with the beneficiaries. What was the impact? What did we get the need of the beneficiaries wrong, or did we use the wrong data and things like that? So I think it's important to talk about both of these learnings. But in general, I think it's important to have role models in the region who are willing to speak about failures. I think it's important to share communicate it, not just keep it within your organization. I think it's also important to, show what has been learned and how that can be applied then to future program design, because sometimes learnings from failure stop just at that. Okay, we learned this, and that's about it, So what do we do with it? So I think those are all
and absolutely publish and disclose it. And disclosure is such an interesting topic here. We had a conversation before we came on the panel about whether this was going to be Chatham House rules or not. And we said, we didn't discuss that before, and is there going to be media? And then we said, well, why would we not disclose? This is about taking private capital for public good. If we are creating a public good, it needs to be public, it needs to be open. And I often find, working in the sector, that it's almost like we're working in a commercial sector, that people want to hide data because there's some kind of competitive edge if you don't share, which makes no sense when you're creating a public good. And Mohamed, you and I touched on this earlier. We know that philanthropic capital is risk capital. And you were saying, but the problem is if we don't have a certain level of confidentiality, people won't start taking risks. They won't be more innovative. Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will. But first of all, thank you all for joining us today. If I may touch on what Muna was talking about very briefly before I leave into that. So I think one of the biggest problems in the region is that people don't accept risk and don't accept failure to a large degree, and I think bigger than other regions. There's always this, aib or whatever it is that you failed, or shame. And I think we need to get over that. But I think the positive thing I've seen in my limited experience over the past 3 years in Sandooq Al Watan is when I go to a donor, and I have 115 major donors, including Nasser al-Nuwais and Badr Ja'far and Sunil here. If I go to them and I say, everything is a rosy picture, everything's going great, they won't trust me anymore. There must be something wrong, right? There must have been a project that didn't perform that well. So I think being honest and transparent with your donors is actually what has helped Sandooq Al Watan attract more funding, because they know we are not putting up a front. We're telling them what is actually going on, the impact we're really achieving. So I just wanted to highlight that very quickly. In terms of transparency, whether we're talking about transparency and governance, I think everyone in this room will agree that that's a positive thing. But my element is that it's not binary. Transparency and governance is not a 1-0 kind of element. It's a scale. And on the other side of the scale are two values we really appreciate. Confidentiality, right? Privacy, I'd like to call privacy. And the other thing with governance is nimbleness. And nimbleness is extremely important in this day and age for you to be able to operate well. So if you have very strict governance, you might not be able to be nimble. And similarly, if you're very transparent, you might lose that privacy concern. And that's a concern for donors who do not want to disclose their names. It could be for beneficiaries who do not want to be advertised as someone who has benefited from the program, or it could be any other stakeholder. And I think the key here is to achieve this balance. And there is no golden rule for that balance. It's just an entity by entity. It's not even a country by country element. It really has to be tailored towards that individual entity and what its mandate is and who its stakeholders are, to try to find that sweet spot between all these conflicting dilemmas.
And it's really kind of a work in progress, isn't it, as we build a community that has more of these conversations. I mean, it's not the first time we talk about this aversion to sharing failure, and yet still we have that issue. And yet, if we don't talk about failure, what works and what doesn't, we don't have opportunities to collaborate. And this is where I want to come to Oman LNG Foundation. I mean, you've been doing an amazing job, Khalid, over the years of building what is essentially one of the first really comprehensive corporate foundations in Oman. And I know that you have been using SROI, social return on investment practices and metrics, to measure what works and what doesn't. And my understanding from you was that by understanding what works and doesn't, it creates opportunities for partnership, for collaboration, even outside of Oman and more broadly in the regions. Talk to us about how transparency can help collaboration and scaling.
Thank you, Claire, for the invitation. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. في البداية, or in the beginning, I would like to congratulate Emirates for the National Day next week.
Yes.
And we had our National Day last week, so congratulations. And going back to your questions, and to Muna, I don't mind, honestly, to brag about what I do. and I'll be bragging till the last day of my...
You're one of the few.
Exactly.
Yes. Which is good.
Maybe because we are different in Oman LNG, because this is a corporate social responsibility model where the company has set aside 1.5% of its niyat to the foundation. We've set the foundation 4 years ago. We're going to celebrate the 5 years anniversary this year, but we've been doing corporate social responsibility for the last 24 years. The company has set aside $500 million throughout all these years. We have in our accounts almost $250 million. When you talk about governance, if you deal with this amount of money, you need to have proper governance. Otherwise, nobody will trust you with all this number of amount. With us, we are governed by the state audits because we are half the shares belongs to the government of Oman, but also we are shared and we have our shareholders here, Shell. We got our shareholders to audit us as well, and we have our internal audit department who comes to check exactly where every penny goes. But then when you talk about bragging, فَلْيَتَنَافَسُ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. Where is فَلْيَتَنَافَسُ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ? I need to tell people about this is not sadaqah, this is not zakah. When I do corporate social responsibility, I need, and by the way, we don't sell anything in Oman, so we are not attaching what we do in the country with anything we sell in Oman. Our production is sold for the coming 25 years already. So we are doing it for corporate social responsibility. So when I go and say, I've done this hospital, I've done this, I've done that, I want others to follow suit. I want them to compete for the sake of the community. Mm-hmm. When you talk about what's gone wrong, there's a lot of things could go wrong. We evaluate lots of projects, but who represent the community? We have governors, we have walis, we have the government, we have people, we have leaders of the tribe, sheikhs. Who do you talk to? Who knows the priority of that region? Is it the government or is it the sheikhs? By the way, sometimes the government guys, they tell you that what you are doing is you are helping the government, but you are not helping the people. It's a very complex business.
So you make a very valid point there. And of course, you have an advantage in the sense you are a corporate foundation. And myself, having worked for a corporate foundation, you do take some of the DNA of the corporation in terms of systems and processes, which is very useful. But I want to come back to Natasha because, you know, actually both of you have worked with the Arab Foundation Forum, and Khalid is still on the board. And a lot of their work was building capacity within regional foundations on how to measure impact. As we know, measuring commercial impact, commercial value creation is much easier. And Natasha, we've seen a lot of move in the region now. Everybody wants to measure impact. Everybody's got a theory of change. Everybody's got KPIs. But how do we help organizations? And how can organizations like Oman LNG Foundation that have that institutionalized processes transform that into the smaller foundations or charities that are struggling with this issue?
I think it's all about sharing, really. It's sharing information and having platforms where smaller groups of people come and share. We're working, we're talking about collaboration among foundations. You know, what often happens, you get foundations and nonprofit in the same room. We have quite different interests and quite different processes. So I think it's important to bring together entities that can actually learn from each other. So I think there's definitely room for more capacity building and for sharing of experiences and information, because I think we've all gone through these programs. We've all learned things. We just never have opportunity to help each other in terms of how we should measure what we've done and what tools we've used, because some of us have done things that worked and some of us haven't. So we just have to share more, I think, and work more on building the capacity. I mean, monitoring and evaluation is number one training that organizations come to KKF and ask for. You know, they say,
exactly,
we want to do it, we just don't know how.
Yep.
And I think it's also important for foundations, talk about Arab Foundations Forum, it's important for foundations to come together and coordinate their efforts. Because if you have one foundation that requests more from their grantees than others, that's a problem. And that's happening in the region right now. You have foundations that are more rigorous when it comes to impact evaluation and the other ones that are not. And so what's happening, nonprofits are saying, well, why would we apply for a grant from the King Khalid Foundation when you guys are asking for so much? And we can go to the other one, they don't ask for a single thing.
And it seems like
you asked me about SROI, and we have a very beautiful experience with SROI, the social
return on investment.
Actually, I used to be in conflict with the finance manager of the company. He keeps telling me, we make money and you spend the money. and we don't see your impact. We don't see. We at least we get some return from the money, but you don't give us any return. When the Arab Spring happened in 2011, we were surprised that the public and the youth were going to close down companies. The only youth that they came to our company were to protect our operation, because they said these are a good company. They were giving us all out the 3 years. So we need, on top of this, our insurance, because we are in a good relationship with community. The insurance, the premium have gone down dramatically. The first time that finance manager come to say me that you saved us a lot of money, millions of dollars, because of what you do.
And that's an important part of building the business case for philanthropy or license to operate more broadly, is that of course there is a return, but it's the measurement part that's difficult. And I wonder if part of that isn't, we haven't been able to build a truly cohesive community here in the region, despite organizations like the Arab Foundation Forum. And Mona, we see it also if we look at the broader impact continuum that Badr mentioned, the enterprise ecosystem. So now we have not just charities and foundations, we have social enterprises, we have impact investing, and yet we don't seem to be talking collectively about how we measure impact, how we improve governance. You're on the board of Emirates Foundation, for example. What do you think we can do more to get that community together so we share and we learn together?
Well, firstly, I'd say, initiatives like the Pearl Initiative, they can bring people together. If this is there's a collective interest at the Pearl Initiative to bring better governance. So why not have workshops where people come together, particularly for real sectors? So let's say, for example, if I'm interested in refugees, how can I learn more from, as you said, the failures of others, bringing in people like the Abdul Aziz Al Ghureir Foundation, bringing them in and sharing that kind of information and partnering, because as you said, there are gaps. There are gaps that need to be filled, whether it be from government to private. How do we fill that gap? And I think that it's important to, obviously have it sector-wise. And so it really boils down to private sector bringing people together, because the government sector will not do it. And
the joy of that private sector is it brings that market-based approach, right? So really looking at what are the gaps. And Mohamed, I know when you set up Sandooq Al Watan, there was really that commitment to say, let's look at the market, let's see what are the gaps in the market. So talk to us a little bit how you built your program portfolio based on needs assessment. So what is already happening and what isn't happening where we need to step in? And also, do you talk to your counterparts in the region? Who are your counterparts in the region?
Absolutely. So starting with, when we first started Sandooq Al Watan about 3 years back, it was a lot of support from advisory groups like McKinsey, who did this pro bono work, and a lot of data that was in public and a lot of stakeholder consultation. But the key was to be able to pivot, which brings me back to my governance / nimbleness element. We pivoted in a huge way when we started operating, because we started realizing that the data in the UAE, the data we gathered from people, wasn't enough or wasn't giving us a clear picture, and that we had to change, and instead of doubling down on particular priorities. So I think that nimbleness of understanding that the UAE doesn't have a lot of data and you need to kind of work on the go is extremely important. The other thing is we've been blessed to have, as I mentioned, 115 donors. These are all high net worth individuals and corporations. So it becomes much easier now, 3 years later, to understand or to bring people together, because Badr is not only a businessman, he's also the founder of this great initiative. Similarly, almost every donor we have is on the board of 10 other entities, private, public, non-for-profit, which gives us this amazing network that we can utilize together. In terms of identifying particular needs, I think it's extremely difficult in the Middle East because of that lack of data element. But I just wanted to say, and this is extremely important and perhaps an unpopular opinion, we shouldn't, I'm for data, I headed a business intelligence unit in the past, it's the biggest need, I do agree, but we shouldn't be too hung up upon it. Meaning, if the data isn't there, that doesn't mean we stop doing work. Or if the data is there, don't take it as if it's biblical. Understand that this data is inaccurate, it could be biased, and even if it wasn't, it might not paint the whole picture, because stories are very different than numbers. And so being able to put up a framework that captures all that is extremely important, I believe. It's not just looking at these numbers and statistics.
Absolutely. So I want to ask Michael to comment on that because he is Mr. Data for us for the moment. But I just want to say that I'm going to come to the floor. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and the ladies will bring you the mics. Where are my mic ladies? You're here. Okay, so ready. So gentlemen, just raise your hands again. We'll come to you. But Michael, just your thoughts then. So data, is it biblical?
Absolutely not. I mean, you know, the motto is no statistic without a story, no story without a statistic. The two have got to go together. And good data science is about understanding the limitations of data and knowing what it is telling you and what it isn't telling you. So I think there's not an opposition there. Can I just jump in on one, but I really want a big thing about nimbleness. I mean, especially when we talk about governance. I think sometimes there's a feeling that the answer with governance is more is always better. And I think it's a curse of some big foundations in Europe and America that I think the governance boards, they've kind of confused advisory board and governance board. They've created boards that are too big, have too much control over the organizations, and they've turned them into incredibly stodgy organizations. I think you need to be clear about what the corporate governance board is around the strategy and its oversight role of the executive, while delegating power to the executive, and then advisory functions are separate. And I think there's a big mistake a lot of foundations have made that we need to avoid. So I think the nimbleness point is very well taken.
Can I add just a small point?
Sure.
I think everyone keeps talking about systems and governance, and we need to talk about recruitment. Because I don't care how well your system is positioned and governed, if you have the wrong person, and I think you can use your imagination on what kind of systems are out there in the world, political and otherwise. If you have that wrong person, they're going to subvert that system. And so you need to...
So can I just very quickly...
Triggered a very topical, please.
You did say
yes,
keep
absolutely.
it
Jump in.
To that point, absolutely. My first question really last week to Bill Gates was, how do you recruit? If you know, for example, if I'm to start my own foundation, how do I recruit? Where do you get your talent, particularly for senior management? And he said that's one of the most difficult things to do. And he said you will go through difficulties.
He actually said that now, finally, after all these years, we're reaching a stage where we have the right talent.
Absolutely.
And in the beginning. And I share with you a story when I was at Shell Foundation, we actually said we would rather have people with commercial business acumen who then learn about development because they understand value creation and bottom line than necessarily the opposite way around. But I want to come back. The board, the topic of the board, there's probably lots of board members in the room as well, so we need to be careful, but including my former board member. But it is a very interesting topic because boards can sometimes hijack mission and hijack impact if they are overly burdensome. And I'm sure we have comments on that. But I want to come to our CEO Council members from the floor. First of all, who's got the... Riz, go ahead. Sorry. We'll come back to you in a second, Riz. Please, go ahead.
My question is a bit different. It's a little bit backtracking to Mr. Green.
Sure. I did say we can come back for questions with Michael, so please go ahead. Yes. Bless you. Thank you.
While you measure social impact, you see social disparity.
I think the mic should be working. I think it should. Just so people at the back can hear. Oh, it's not. Yeah, it's working. It's working. It's working.
So while you see, you measure social impact and you look at social disparity within a country, and as you noticed, you mentioned the human rights or personal rights have been really regressing. And as we know, we have more and more economic disparity, which definitely impacts our society. How do you measure social disparity within a geography, within a country?
So what we try and measure is more kind of, is everyone included? And then what we can then see is where disparities exist. I'm just to give you one example.
Because there will be two different indices in the same country.
But you can see, often it's reflected. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't talk about here, one of the things we find is how badly the United States does. And that is actually, a lot of it is because of the inequity, that you've got the greatest healthcare in the world for some and not for others. So I think in some ways those inequalities are baked into the data. And for example, we picked it up, I was speaking to the European Parliament, and a member of Parliament from a country that will remain nameless said, your data must be wrong. You've criticised us. So your data says we don't have all our children in school. Every child goes to school in our country. And I had a flash of inspiration, said, well, does that include the Roma, the gypsy population? And she said, well, no, they don't count. So I think the data can actually reveal those things.
Thank you, Michael. Riz, please.
Hi there, Riz Khan. it's interesting, and I'm not really sure who to throw this out to, so anyone who wants to take it, because you've all alluded to this to some extent. The idea that reporting and transparency and governance, there's a risk of it becoming a short-term requirement. And one of the things with capitalism since I was in my 20s, described myself as a socio-capitalist, which I guess overlaps with philanthro-capitalist to some degree. But capitalism in its purest form, of course, can achieve great things. And one of the corrupted versions of it is where companies are required to make very short-term reports, and it prevents long-term planning and long-term gain. And it's one of the things that can really affect planning a good social outcome. So I wonder what would be the best way to try to change mindsets so that when trying to create governance and transparency and openness, there's a way to say, well, look, we can allow for some time for the impact to show itself. Because sometimes things get worse before they get better. So I wonder how that mindset can be changed so it doesn't become sort of capitalistically bureaucratized,
Great question. Thanks, Riz. And I always find it surprising when people think you can create socioeconomic change in like 12 months. Someone gives you a grant for 12 months. Like, really? So, to the panel, who would like to take that? Natasha?
I'll take that a little bit. Well, I think that's the beauty of foundations. Foundations are the ones, the governments can't do that. So foundations, on one hand, they can act quicker than the governments because they're less bureaucratic in most cases, not always. But at the same time, they can take longer because they're not corporates who are looking for quick returns, and they're not government that is, again, more bureaucratic and needs and changes quicker, so needs quicker results. So I think that's where foundations and that's philanthropic organizations can take that role, and in addition to some other roles that they can take in terms of taking risk and more risk and everything. But I think foundations are really well positioned to do things quickly and then take a longer time to wait for results.
And I think it's one of the things we don't acknowledge enough is that it is risk capital. It can be long term. And yes, please do, Michael.
I think the point's absolutely well taken. Let me put out a challenge, which is I think there is a danger that the focus on impact becomes a focus on foundations making themselves busy to pretend they're having impact and not focusing on the impact themselves. So, I mean, I've got a couple of tests. I mean, one is if you're funding anything serious, you can't be funding for 1 year. Yeah, I mean, it should be 3-year minimum, if not longer. And I'm surprised how, again, not talking about in this region, but globally, how few foundations will even think beyond 3 years and how many still are funding 1 year. The second one is restricted funding. I mean, the biggest lies are written as grantees write about how their funding has been used to satisfy donors. Restricted funding should just be banned.
Just be banned.
Banned, absolutely banned.
I think there's broad consensus on that. Zahra, and then Rashid. Yes.
Great, thank you so much.
Just tap it a bit. Usually they sometimes just... There you go. You're on. She's on.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Thank you again so much for the discussion. Very, very informative. So I actually founded recently an impact investing advisory here about 8 months ago. And the biggest bridge, which Claire touched on, was about sort of the private sector and the sort of philanthropy bridge. And how do we actually build that? So, for example, as Claire also mentioned, Next Gen, 82% they're saying are all about sort of, really how can we do value creation? How can we sort of invest in things that are going to be positive return? What is it from your experience? I mean, I also had the pleasure of being at MISC and speaking there last week, 2 weeks ago, about Next Gen and sort of philanthropy and the bridge of impact investing. So if I sit with some of my private families in the Next Gen, they say, we really want to add value and we want to be giving back and feeling good all at once. What would be some of the insights or input that you've had with perhaps the Next Gen discussion that you may have had in philanthropy and perhaps impact? Thank you.
Next generation. Khalid, you want?
We have good programs. If you want to invest, you can invest with us.
Great to know. I shall let them know.
Definitely.
Yes. So maybe, Mohamed, this is one for you, since you're probably Gen Y, still Gen, I don't know. But I mean, and you're working obviously with, Sandooq Al Watan is an amalgamation of a lot of family office capital. So are you seeing this generational difference now? And what do you think the impact is on impact and transparency?
There's definitely a generational difference. We have, as I mentioned, a large number of donors, and we can actually see the different age groups and how their priorities are different and how they understand philanthropy in different ways. Absolutely. I think with the younger folks, I think they are more skeptical of, I don't know if this is a popular opinion, but they are much more skeptical about how funds are being utilized. I think they want to have something that's authentic, and I touched on that, something real. They don't want to be, excuse my language, BS'd, right? And the third element I think that's important to them is that they need constant engagement. The older groups are usually investing, and then a year later you come back to them, but the younger ones want you to WhatsApp them every month and just tell them what's going on, right? So those are the three kind of trends, and if you know, based on your business, I don't know the details, and from our perspective, we kind of try to deal with our donors like we deal with customers. We know what their priorities are, we constantly engage them because we know that the majority of them will donate again if we do a good job. And that's how we kind of split it up with the next generation.
Talking about impact, I just have, this is very simple story to tell when you talk about stories telling. I had a request from local camel guys to go and sponsor their camel race. And I was reluctant to go and do this. But then the guys, they said, this is what they do in that village, so let's do it. So we did it, small amount of money, $10,000, 3,000 riyal Omani. So I found this guy, old guy with his khanjar, Bedouin, coming to see me after 3 months. So I just let the guy came to my room, to my office, and then he said, do you know how much this $10,000 you gave us multiply effect of it? I said, how does this guy knows about the multiplier effect about our $10,000? He said, we got $200,000 real out of this, which is 2 million dirham. I said, how did you get it? I want to give you $10,000. You give me the 2 million. He said, with your $10,000, we did a 2 days racing days for our village. The racing or the winning camels were sold at the time with tens of thousands of riyals. All the ladies around that area came to sell their ideas and their food and all this. So just imagine, sometimes with a small amount of money, and who's telling me the impact? Is the community. It's not myself, it's not
the
reporting,
market.
it's not a consultant, it's a guy who comes from the area. This is a very, very strong social impact.
And then therein lies the challenge.
Exactly.
So you have rich feedback like that, but then how do you aggregate that across the organization to demonstrate impact? So it's a great example, but we'll come back. Rashid, please. So we have contagion from mic to mic. It's always the biggest challenge. Don't worry, Rashid. We can. There you go.
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. Rashid Nasri. I'm Deputy CEO of Oman LNG Development Foundation, but also I am the Deputy Chairman of Arab Foundation Forum. There are 4 keywords today. I think if we just focus on them and try to really get the maximum of them, I think we will reach to what we wanted to reach out of this. Transparency, impact, collaboration, and partnership. I think the platform is really good, and I think this is a golden time. Why I'm saying that? Because government now, we've been called, by the way, by the Arab League in Cairo, which represent about 24 or 22, what they call it, Arab countries. And now they've been pushed to do the sustainability 17 goals, as Michael mentioned. So they're getting a push to do it, but also they are really seeking the help and support from private sector. So in terms of transparency, it's either it's coming voluntarily or by force. So that can be really a good platform to capitalize an individual, and I'm sure that we have other people representing foundation and countries to capitalize on that. What we have done, they said that we don't have an entity or that can really support this effort. And I jumped and I said, we have our foundation forum. Yes, there are some hiccups here and there, but it's working. We have members, and I'm really happy to see also members of our foundation forum here. So I think it's a golden opportunity to see how parallel initiative, by the initiative itself, working together with other foundation forum, where we can really leverage into that and maximize the benefit, and also work in the governance and transparency and share those stories. Because we've been, by the way, called to share our story. We've been they ask us that one of the best example in Arab world is Oman LNG Development Foundation, and please come and present it. I think this is a golden opportunity, and that's why I wanted,
well done you for mentioning the Arab Foundation Forum, and we should give a shout out to them, especially as being the former chair. And it was always my frustration that we have this regional network of philanthropists, but it was a real struggle to scale it up, and a real aversion to sharing across the region. And a lot of, we're different from you, and the Gulf is different from the rest of the region. And it was like, we were saying, it doesn't matter. Let's just start to build this community. And I want to put that back to the panel. How do we get better at creating this broader ecosystem? How do we make sure that the angel investors talk to the charities, talk to the philanthropists, they talk to the angel investors who talk to the ecosystem, the impact continuum? How do we build that in the region? Natasha.
I think I come back to sharing of success stories. I think it really comes down to that, because if people are still seeing each other as competition,
right,
and until that mindset changes amongst us as philanthropists, whether we're coming from the private sector or from private foundations or individual donors, we have to stop seeing each other as competitors, and we have to understand that alone, and none of us can do anything, really. We cannot do a large-scale change just by ourselves. Yeah. So we have to partner. So until that shift happens, I don't think anything is going to change significantly. And I think the only way I can see that shift happening is talking about success stories, having meetings like this more and more and more, so that we can share experience.
Mind shift. How do you change mind shift short of frontal lobotomies?
Can I just add just a suggestion on that?
A very good
I wouldn't, it's difficult to talk about mind shift because that takes decades, and honestly, none of us will be able to predict the exact way to do so. But I think one thing you can do at your foundation is implement certain policies that enforce that element. So for example, we have a big R&D program. We don't just give R&D grants. There are certain conditions and rules that necessitate for us to involve all stakeholders. And a project would not be approved without reaching out to other foundations who work in that particular field, without reaching out to angel investors, as you mentioned, to the relevant universities and so forth. And that's ingrained into the KPIs. So it's really something you can do as one. It's not going to solve the problem, but it's something that can help your organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mohamed on that. The responsibility lies on the individuals from within the foundations. If you have it as part of your DNA that you as a founder would like to collaborate, would like to learn more, will reach out as a founder to see, what are the best practices, how can I learn from others, how can we collaborate? Because at the end of the day, we've spoken about this. It's the non-profit sector. There is absolutely no reason why we should be restricted on, not speaking about our information. So I think it's really important, as you said, to have it as part of the DNA of that particular foundation or individuals from within to say, listen, let's reach out. So yeah.
Michael,
I have a slightly provocative proposal. So when we do data analysis, I often take it to one of our advisory board members, a professor at MIT, and sometimes nothing happens. And he goes, that's great, that's a finding. And there's a danger that we start thinking that we only learn from successes.
Yes.
So my provocative proposal is what you should have is a meeting, but don't share successes. Have a failure festival. Yeah? To have a completely different
Champion
conversation.
Failure.
And
yes.
you may find you have a different conversation.
Yes. So, I have to cite, of course, the Shell Foundation report that did exactly that in 2010, where we went out and we said, our old model really didn't work, and here's why, so we changed it. And equally at Emirates Foundation, we had a great conversation with the board. We had a program that wasn't working. We went and said, it's not working. They didn't fire us all. They said, okay, why is it not working? And how can you fix it? And then, even better, we said to them, you can help us fix it, because these are the broader issues within the marketplace that we need your help with. So why is it, how do we help boards get better at having those kind of conversations and break away this fear of disclosure?
Recruitment. I mean, that's one thing I keep saying. If you don't have the right people, instead of trying to change someone's mindset when they're 40 or 50 or 60, It's just recruiting the right people is the first and most important part, whether it's on your board or as in your executive, and then you can go from there.
More comments and thoughts from the floor. And I want to, yes, Summer, the mic is coming to you here.
Sure. Hi, yeah. So you talked about awareness raising. You touched upon it lightly for the philanthropists themselves. But I think for the general public, are they really aware of the SDGs? And are they aware of how to integrate the SDGs, within everything that they do? So I'm a co-founder of a startup, and we focus on, for example, SDG 5, gender equality. But I find that a lot of people are not actually aware of the SDGs and how they can work with it. And accordingly, I want to ask Mike, how would you measure my contribution, as a startup?
I'm not so concerned about public awareness of the SDGs. I mean, it's a difficult brand, it's very complicated. In 2005, there was a survey done by the European Union looking at awareness of the Millennium Development Goals across Europe. And Italy had the highest awareness of the Development Goals, and the United Kingdom had the lowest awareness. They also asked questions about which country had most commitment to funding development. The UK had the highest, Italy had the lowest. Yeah? And I think it's just the research. So I think awareness in its own sake isn't good in its own right. And actually, if you can reframe this agenda through something that means something to people, then that's fine. And that's actually something we do with Social Progress Index, is it can be presented in an SDG lens, but we've got plenty of communities around the world who are using it, not even mentioning the SDGs. So I think bringing home the SDGs, making them part of your conversation, only using them if they're necessary. And then I think, again, the role of a startup is within any collective impact conversation is making sure you're clear about what's your part in that ecosystem and how can you collaborate with others on the issues you're working on ensuring that you're seeing how you're all collaborating together to achieve the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
And then how would you measure it in your own indices? How would you, I'm just wondering if your sample, your methodology actually includes that in your...
So when we're just measuring the outcomes, so then I think you'd have to see, we could say, is there a change over time? And then you'd have to look about trying to figure out some of the attribution. What we can do is say, is there a change over time? Is it greater than your peers? We can do some analysis.
You do sample startups and smaller organizations and so on, or do you look more at policies and governments?
So none of that. No, that's all inputs. So we would just be measuring what's the outcome in that particular sector.
So, but it is an interesting point about the SDGs. When the OECD set up their global philanthropy network, they asked the question of the founding members, who were all foundations, how many of them had used the SDGs to define their choices and their program portfolios. And literally everybody said, we don't speak SDG. This is something that the UN has cooked up and they didn't ask us about it, and we don't. And it's a challenge we had at the Arab Foundation Forum as well, trying to use that as guidelines. I want to come back to the panel now because we're running short of time, and I'm very conscious that the Pearl Initiative is building this community of philanthropists. We have other members of the community here, and I think it would be really good if we can come away with some really tangible, practical ideas about how we help to create a more cohesive ecosystem. So I'm going to take one more question from the floor, but then I want to ask each one of you to just come back to us, if you can, with a recommendation to the Pearl Initiative and this room more broadly of what is one thing that we can do to improve impact and sharing and disclosure through this community. So final question for... Riz, go for it.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, sorry, it's me again. I was just thinking, as a journalist, I look very carefully at words, and I always listen very carefully to words. And I think, we've had a kind of strange transition over the past decade from corporate social responsibility to creating shared value to triple bottom line. I think people get very confused. And I'm helping a friend with his foundation in trying to get aspects of it in order. And one of the things he said when we first met and talked, he said, I want to give back. And I asked him, what have you taken? And I said, why don't you change the terminology and just say you want to give forward? Because really, that's what we're trying to do, I guess. We're trying to invest in the future. So I think sometimes the terminology is where people get confused, and the UN is great at it. I do a lot of events with the UN. But I think that's part of it.
Well, it's
sometimes.
also an interesting point that was raised at the round table we had with Bill Gates, where there was a point made that if you are a successful business person, you don't have to wait till you're at retirement age before you start to invest philanthropically. And often that's what happens, when actually many of the participants said start early. Start early and have fun with it was one of our final recommendations. So back to the panel then. Michael, your thoughts. So obviously you're from outside of the region, but having heard what you heard earlier at the CEO Council and now with this panel, what would your advice be to people in this room as to one thing we can do to improve impact? Improve disclosure for impact.
I cheat too. I think I'm serious about the failure festival. I think really talking about failure. And the second one is, with all the caveats, data provides the language for collaboration. And sharing data, being part of a common data landscape, allows you as philanthropists to act together, but also thinking about how you collaborate with others. That data is the language of collaboration.
Thank you. I like that as a soundbite. Data is the language for collaboration. I hope someone tweeted that. # Pearl Initiative. Natasha.
I think our Foundations Forum and Pearl Initiative organizing an event like this to keep talking. I think this is a great starting point, and we can have more of this.
And you will bring on board your Saudi cohort if that's something like that happens as a leader.
We'll definitely be there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Khalid, your thoughts? What's the one thing you'd like to see happen?
I think what we're doing is something unique, and we should talk about it. I think we talked earlier about being shy. I think we're all being shy. I don't know why. And if people tell us that we are bragging about what we do, let's brag. Let's compete. Who's going to benefit is the community who's going to benefit. What's wrong with competing? Let's compete.
I want to partner.
Okay, so we can partner and we compete in some others. But I think networking. I hardly know the work going in the region rather than the
because there aren't platforms for networking, for philanthropy.
Exactly.
That's a very good point. I mean, it's such a rarity, isn't it, to have a philanthropic-focused event. Okay, noted. Thank you. Mona.
Which leads to my point, which is really going back to the point of content development. So if there was better content development around all the foundation, whether it be foundations in the region, whether it be really good impact reports, right? Really good opinion articles, really good, like take Bill Gates as a prime example. Obviously, we don't have the budgets that he has. However, if we can have that quality as our bar in terms of content development, we would all know about each other's work, right? So I think that we need to emphasize on bringing back good content development, whether it be digital, whether it be non-digital. And one piece of advice really, or what I'd like to see out of the Pearl Initiative is having these very specific sector-wise kind of workshops where if I'm interested in a certain focus area, bringing those people together to share that information and really kind of learn from each other needn't be a very long, it can be half a day, it can be 4 hours.
Sector as an industry or sector as an area?
Industry and also focus area.
Right.
So that kind of thing. So sharing that kind of information from the region, though, not just specifically to the UAE. So if someone from Saudi can share, through that kind of workshop, that would be great.
Okay, noted. Mohamed, and then I'm going to come to the CEO Council.
I think my colleagues have mentioned almost everything that is important. Maybe I can take this 30 seconds or 1 minute to answer this question that's been rattling in my brain. You've mentioned it earlier, is how do you set expectations when someone wants results in a year? And it goes back to your recommendations as well. And my biggest advice is something that I've done that worked with me, hopefully it'll work with others, is you need to set the expectations at the very beginning. That's extremely important. If you go up and you sell false hopes to a donor, you're going to get bit. So you need to kind of set the horizon on when you're going to achieve that impact and remind the donors constantly about it. But more importantly, you need to have a strong spine because these donors will pressure you. I mean, Badr is a nice guy, right? But there are other donors that will call you a month after you've set up. You haven't even recruited your staff, and they'll say, what's your impact,
what's happened?
Right?
Yeah.
And you need to be able to look them in the eye and say, it's not there yet, and we're staying the course. I think that's the important.
And system change takes time. So a final comment from the floor.
I don't know if it makes sense, but disclosure comes in many levels. And you have just succeeded in bringing many different foundations who started disclosure. And you're asking yourself, how can I do that? So I really believe, I don't know if it makes sense, the founder should answer, but why don't you adopt a board where they could meet regularly in addition to workshops and share disclosure and also avoid overlapping works.
Not reinventing the wheel, yes.
We've done it through the Chamber of Commerce in Jeddah in the past. Now it stopped, it died, because it goes back to individuals again. And so we took all these CSR heads of companies and got them through the chamber to try and collaborate. And it did work for a couple of years good when there were the individuals who were engaged. And then it died due to individuals again. So you could initiate that. I really think it's a great mission for the Pearl Initiative.
Thank you so much. And I think we have the platform, so it's relatively nascent, but we have, where is Yasmin? We have the Philanthropy Circle that has already been created. I think they've only had a few engagements thus far, but I think this is a great opportunity to expand. Yasmin, just tell us a little bit more about that and your plans for once you get the mic. And while you're getting a mic, I'm just going to summarize. So Michael, thank you. Failure Festival, yes, brilliant. Data is the language for collaboration, thank you. Natasha, yes, talking about the AFF and the PI, more collaboration. Khalid, competition. No, partnership. Networks. I think we need more networks, more events like this. Muna, absolutely, quality of content development. I mean, this is how we get Gen Y on board, right? Nobody reads anything anymore. We need, we all close down the link if it doesn't open within 0.09 nanoseconds or something. So fast content, quality content. And Mohamed, get some spine because you're going to need it. But let's not shy away from disclosure. So let's give the final word to Yasmin. Just talk to us about the Philanthropy Circle and how we can build this community.
Thank you. So the Gulf Business Philanthropy Circle was constituted by the Pearl Initiative in approximately May this year. The idea is that we bring together heads of CSR, essentially anyone responsible for managing any philanthropic capital in any form across the region. To date, we've got about 20 representatives from across the Gulf region. We're looking to expand that circle. So if anyone is interested in joining, please let myself know or the team, and we'd be welcome to have you on board. But the idea is that we bring them together to share best practices, have a failure festival, and basically learn from each other and share our experiences and insights from on the ground. The next meeting is on December the 12th, so you have time to sign up and attend a meeting in December. So,
perfect. So just to say that this meeting is not over yet. We're all going to reconvene outside for networking. The Pearl Initiative staff will all be there. So any of you interested in signing up to the Philanthropy Circle, please go and talk to the team. They would happily do that. And please stay around. I don't think Michael is disappearing anywhere anytime soon because he's not on a flight till later on, so you can come and harass him. I would love for our other fellow panelists to stay with us for a while afterwards. So I'm sure we missed lots of questions, but we can do that over networking. So let me just thank all of our amazing panelists for your intervention. A round of applause for them, please. And again, a big thank you to all of you for joining us here today. And please join us outside. Thank you. Thanks.